My topic today is 10 characteristics of highly effective teachers. And I'm definitely coming at this topic from the perspective of an English language teacher. And I know you are here from various fields, I imagine. So although there will be some commonalities, there might be some noted differences. I feel very lucky to speak on this topic because this topic is why we're all here today. It doesn't matter if we're administrators. We all probably started our careers or are still in the career of teaching. And we come to events like this so that we can ultimately be more effective to the most important stakeholder in the process of education, and that is our students. So I hope to share with you some ideas about what I think is important with regard to highly effective teaching and what some of the literature says about highly effective classroom teachers. So what I hope to do with you in the next 45 minutes or so is to go through a number of different things. First, I'll give you some of my assumptions and disclaimers about the topic. Then we'll look at the reasons why people become teachers in the first place. We'll take a look at various stakeholder definitions of what is an effective teacher. We'll look at maybe some contextual similarities and differences of maybe our different contexts. And then we'll get to my top 10. So starting out with a couple of disclaimers. Disclaimer 1 is that just because I am here in front of you today talking about highly effective teachers does not mean that I classify myself as highly effective. Like you, I have strengths in the classroom, but I have also areas that I probably need to improve upon. And my rationale for doing research in this topic, it was my desire or quest to be more highly effective. Disclaimer 2 is that just because this presentation is 10 characteristics doesn't mean that that's all there are. In fact, the initial draft of this PowerPoint presentation was 26 characteristics. And that might take us all day. And 10 was just a nice round number, perfect for a 45-minute plenary. So I probably will miss some characteristics that you find to be important. Now, some of my assumptions are that you are interested in professional development because you are here with us today, and that you're also interested in this topic. I know you're kind of a captive audience because I think there are no other sessions right now, but hopefully this topic will interest you. Another assumption that I have is that effectiveness is measured differently in different subject matter areas, as well as in different educational contexts and countries. So let's look for some similarities rather than focus on what might be different. So if this were an hour plenary, I would put you together within a think, pair, share activity and ask you to address 2 tasks. The first might be to think of some characteristics that you find present in a teacher that you consider to be highly effective. We don't have time for that, but we do have time for task 2, but you only have 1 minute. Task 2 is to discuss with the person sitting next to you or in back of you or wherever and share why you got into teaching all those years ago. Well, for some of you, it doesn't look like it's all those years ago. So you have 1 minute. Please share with the person sitting next to you the reasons why you decided to be a teacher. Thank you. Wasn't that a quick minute? Let's take a look at what the research shows are the major reasons why people go into teaching. The number 1 reason is for altruistic reasons, the desire to make a difference in your students' lives. So with a show of hands, how many of you went into teaching or stay in teaching for this reason? Raise your hand. No, there's most probably lots of different reasons, so no problem. You can raise your hand a lot more if you want. Another reason, although not in any order of ranking, is to see the world, and this is particularly from my own field, English language teaching. Anybody get into teaching because you wanted to travel, discover the world? A few. How about those long summer vacations? Okay? Anybody stay in teaching? It's one of the sole benefits, although the more I travel around the world and talk to groups of educators like yourselves, I'm learning that is now kind of a myth, all those long summer vacations. How about the impact of a favorite teacher? You had a role model when you were a student. Okay. The desire to be on stage. Do we have any failed actors, actresses, rock stars out there who didn't make it in Hollywood or Bollywood and decided to be a teacher? Maybe not here, but you probably recognize this in your colleagues. There are always a few showmen in our departmental ranks that probably went into teaching for this very reason. Life of the mind. Life of the mind refers to staying around young people to keep you young. Now, although I must say that when I first went into teaching, I was fairly young, but now it seems like it's a really good characteristic to keep me feeling young. Anybody here go in for life of the mind? Okay. Anyone here for family tradition? You come from a long line of teachers in the family. Okay. You're probably wondering why that next one is on here, aren't you? Well, for two reasons, really. The first being, it is late in the day, and I wanted to make sure you were all indeed paying attention, and you were. However, a more important reason is that maybe one day when I do this presentation somewhere, there will be someone in the audience who has the position or the opportunity to change the lives of teachers, and suddenly that light bulb will go off, and they'll say, hey, we should be paying our teachers more for the important work they do. Wishful thinking? Maybe, but I'm going to keep it on there nonetheless. Now, Joe mentioned that I served as TESOL International President, and that was like my #1 career goal, and it was an amazing 3 years where I got to travel the world and meet teachers from all kinds of places. And one of the places I went was the Beijing Symposium on Research. It was a TESOL-sponsored event. And I had a very famous TESOLer in the audience. Do we have any English language teachers here? Okay, maybe you know of a Professor David Noonan? Yes. Okay, like an ELT god, author of 3 zillion textbooks, whatever. He was in the audience, and when I was going over the slide, he raised his hand and he said, Christine, you have forgotten one. And I said, which one, David? And he says, the accidental teacher. What do you think he meant by the accidental teacher?
My mistake.
That's indeed what he meant. And what he meant was, he got into teaching. Well, he kind of found himself in a teaching situation. He liked it and decided to go back and get the training that he needed to have it as a career. Now, as TESOL president then, I always felt embarrassed that I'm an accidental teacher. Do we have any others here in the audience? Now, since David Noonan admitted it, I don't feel so shy to admit it anymore. So there you have it, some of the reasons why people go into teaching. Let's have a look at the Gulf context. And those of you who are from, especially the tertiary level institutes, this might be very familiar with us. In trying to delegate one slide to the dynamic of education, certainly at the university level, these are the things that I've come up with. First of all, back when the crisis hit, in UAE we're lucky because although we're not rich, we get paid enough where we really only have to work one job, unlike many teachers in different countries around the world. But when the crisis hit, no, we still only had to work one job, but what actually happened was teacher salaries, because teacher salaries are high, in order to cut 25% from the budget, who did we have to get rid of? Teachers. So although no one really lost their job because people resigned and they didn't rehire and replace them, people let go of 25% of our teachers. Where do you think their additional teaching hours went? To the 75% that remained. So all of a sudden, we had 5 more hours of teaching. And you know, some people might think 5 hours, hully-wully. Maybe some of you don't know what hully-wully means. It means oh, that's nothing, that doesn't matter, right? But that's exactly what administrators think. They don't see how that really changed a teacher's existence in this part of the world, because it meant maybe 30 to 35 more students. It meant another class prep, often in a different subject. It meant all the administration and the administrivia that goes with that extra group of students. So this thing really changed the lives of teachers, and definitely not for the good. We also have a big push for accreditation in our institutions here in the UAE. And not just accreditation from the UAE, but external accreditation. And what often happens, have any of you been through an accreditation from an external body? What does that often result in for the teacher? Lots of paperwork, right? So not only do you have to do all these things that you probably already do, but then you also have to keep evidence that you're doing them. So suddenly we have 5 more hours of teaching, and then we have all the extra work that comes along with accreditation. Another phenomenon here is the nearly continual change in the curriculum and how it's assessed. When I came here way back in 1994, we were in the curriculum, and the materials we were using were textbooks written by publishers. A couple of years later, teachers all up in arms, these textbooks are not culturally appropriate. They do not take into consideration Islam, so therefore throw out the textbooks. Let's have teachers who are familiar with the culture write the materials for students. So we did. A couple of years later, what do you think happened? These textbooks are awful, they're full of typos, blah, blah, blah. We throw out the teacher-produced materials, and what do? Publisher-produced materials. I, in my 22 years here, have been through that cycle at least 5 times. So you have that continual cycle, and often the teachers, because we tend to stay here a long time, it's a great place to work, we have the institutional memory, whereby our administrators often do not, because they usually have shorter shelf lives in this part of the world than teachers. Am I right? I see some people giggling, and that's true. Now, I teach in the higher colleges of technology, and we have a great environment. We have a wireless campus. Every teacher and every student has not only a laptop, but an iPad as well. And we're encouraged to use those in our classes. But what is happening to at least the English language teacher population? It is getting older. In fact, the average age of a TESOL international member is low 40s. Okay? So what happens to people as they get older vis-a-vis technology? Change gets harder as you get older. So sometimes teachers, especially in this age bracket, feel like they're being forced to teach with or through a medium that they don't actually buy into. So, and oftentimes they feel that we are using technology just because we have it, not because it's the best real way of teaching. So these are some of the major trends, at least within tertiary education here in the UAE. Let's turn now to looking at some definitions of what makes a good teacher. And we're going to look at it from a variety of different stakeholder perspectives, including administrators, educational researchers, teachers, and students. Now, I have to say that because of the time constraints of this presentation, we're only going to look at one example from each perspective. But there are loads of stuff out there. The ones I've selected, some of them are quite old, but they are ones that resonate with me and ones that I feel very useful. A review of the literature on your part will reveal lots of different studies. So let's look at the administrators one. Now, I don't usually agree very much with administrators because I'm a classroom teacher, but I really like this definition that came out of a study conducted by Seymour Erickson. In fact, I like this definition so much that this is the definition I use when I frame my performance evaluation self-assessment at the end of the year. Let's look at the components of this. An outstanding teacher should be an inspired instructor who is concerned about students, an active scholar who is respected by disciplined peers, and an efficient, organized educator who is accessible to both students and teachers. I really find this definition, this is exactly what I consider an effective teacher. It kind of covers pretty much everything. Now, if we look at the educational researcher's perspective, instead of a definition, in this study by Rosenschein and First, which is from the early 70s, there's a list of positive attributes of good teaching. And the one I'd like to focus in on is the one that caused the most controversy when this study came out. And that was the third one from the bottom. Effective teachers are not overly critical. And when many people read this characteristic, they thought to themselves, at least from an English language perspective, isn't it our job to be critical? Because if we're not critical of our students' writing or whatever skill-based things they're doing, who is going to be? And I think the word overly is the key here. Because although when we correct our students' language, for example, or whatever else you teach, we don't want to be so critical that they'll shut down and not want to do anything again. But it's our job, don't you think, that we're, for the most part, a bit critical because we want students to acquire good or better English. Let's look at the teacher perspective. Now, the characteristics here represent the percentage of which these characteristics appeared in the top 3. So, number 1, treats the students as an individual. Is enthusiastic and inspiring. Has caring qualities. Is funny and is spontaneous and flexible. Now, normally what I would do, if you'd had that discussion about characteristics that you find effective, we would have probably had many of the same kinds of propositions as we do from this slide. Let's turn now to the students themselves. The study I've selected to go over is a really good study, and it's widely available on the internet. You just have to do a search of what makes a good teacher, UNESCO. It was commissioned by UNESCO. It had a very big cohort, 500 children in 50 different countries. And this study impresses me, not by the power of the numbers or whatever, but by the sophistication of some of the responses. Let's take a look at a few. According to the children from this study, ages 12 to about 16, a great teacher is one who interacts with the child, who shows the child or the student's emotion or affection, who makes them understand emotion, smiles even when they make mistakes, teaches not only the textbook, but the reality of what is happening outside. Now this one in particular, I feel is highly sophisticated. I'm not a mother, so I don't know how teenagers are, but can any of you say, do you think this is sophisticated for a second language learner all over the world, this kind of thing? And is dedicated to the job to round out our list. So here we go, my top 10. I must say, another disclaimer, these are in no order of importance except for number 1. So for me, the most important characteristic, if you want to be considered highly effective, is that you must feel a calling to the profession. You must feel that you were kind of born a teacher and you can't imagine yourself doing any other job. So you must feel a passion to help students grow and learn. I think if you don't have this calling, what often happens to those of us who work with people, the phenomenon of burnout is an important one. I'm sure you've all heard of burnout. You know that teaching is one of the top 5 jobs where people can suffer from this medical phenomenon called burnout. And I think that, I don't know, maybe at high stress times, one of the things I do, sometimes everything is so stressful, there is so much to do, the only way I can cope is to think about why I got into teaching in the first place. Sometimes we have to shut down and remember kind of the end game. So this calling for the profession is something that I think is essential if you want to stave off or recover from burnout. Number 2 is professional knowledge. I feel very strongly about professional knowledge, and I am very proud of the fact that in the UAE and in other Gulf countries, there is a requisite qualification that everybody has to have before they get a job. We are not one of those countries where you get a job teaching English just because you speak English. There are many countries. I know in Asia is one of the prime countries where you just have to speak English to be able to teach it. So what are the requisite qualifications for teaching in the UAE? Well, at any of the government institutions, universities, a master's, at least in my field, a master's in TESOL or applied linguistics, in addition to 3 years of teaching experience at the same or similar level. And they're very strict upon that because the jobs are good here, so they pretty much have their choice of all the great candidates out there looking. Recognizing the importance of professional development is yet crucial, at least in this part of the world. I got my Ph.D. in 1992. I know that's a long time ago, isn't it? Imagine if I hadn't gone to a single if I said, okay, September 1992, I'm done, that's it for me. Imagine if I had never gone to another conference or PD session or read a journal article. Okay, I'd still be kind of clever because I did, make it over the hurdle of getting a doctorate, but I definitely wouldn't be current in my field. So recognizing that, when you have your terminal degree, that's just the beginning of all the training and all the professional development that you'll be doing. Next on my list for professional knowledge, IT skills. In this part of the world, you will be left behind if you refuse to kind of jump on the bandwagon with technology. If you don't embrace technology and use it to your own benefit in the classroom, not only will students not want to listen to you, but you really won't have a job for too long, because the UAE especially is a highly technological and educational environment, and lots of cutting-edge research is going on in the 3 government institutions, especially by mobile technology and iPad technology in the classroom. So number 2 on my list, professional knowledge. Number 3, personal qualities or personality. And being cognizant of the fact that I don't consider myself very funny or very entertaining. So I was always worried about, will my students like me if I don't make them laugh or if I don't joke around? So 2 quotations have influenced my thoughts about the importance of personality. The first one is here. Teachers who were identified by students as changing their lives were rarely praised for their knowledge of the subject matter, their teaching methods, or their materials. Those were all givens in the students' minds. But what really mattered to students were the teacher's human qualities. And I'm assuming you all do student evaluations of teaching at your institutions. If you look back, and usually a student evaluation of teaching, it's like a 10-item Likert scale where they tick strongly agree or something like that. But there are always a couple of open-ended questions at the bottom, like, what did you like about this teacher? How could he or she improve, right? If you read the comments in those boxes, most of the comments, do your students ever say, oh, Miss Christine, she uses a variety of activities in the classroom? What kinds of things do they say? Yeah, they talk about your personality. Okay, one time I got, and Arab people, you will know what this means. Miss, your road is green. That's good, right? If someone says your road is green, it's good. Like, you will have a good life. I also got, Miss, you are in my eye. Is that good? Okay, I found out that that's a good thing. It sounds painful, but it's actually good from the perspective of students. So if you look at some of your back student evaluations of teaching, I bet you will find way more comments about your personality and not so much about, the number and variety of activities you do. Or, if you're an English teacher, the quality of your English, basically. And in fact, strangely enough, in most fields within teaching effectiveness, one of the things that teachers do not mention that is important to be an effective teacher is knowledge of the content area. It's one of these things that exists in not only English language teaching, but math education, history. It's very strange, don't you think? Maybe it's one of those things where people consider it a given. Let's look at my other quote. Effective teachers don't necessarily need a flamboyant, entertaining style to be memorable. Sometimes they just have to be sympathetic and encouraging. Teachers who are found to have high levels of empathy and caring for their students are called in the literature highly facilitative teachers. And research shows with highly facilitative teachers, you have fewer behavior problems in your classrooms, and the students do better in terms of academic gain. So being empathetic, being caring, being flexible, all of these characteristics are deemed as good, and it's kind of a win-win situation with students as well. Now, the result of this study was a book that I wish I had written. Don't you love that title? Kids don't learn from people they don't like. And that pretty much says it all, don't you think? So personality is important. What are the characteristics of personality that people have identified as being important? Well, being caring, being empathetic. Some of the research on that third one, fairness, is very, very telling. What is said in the literature, at least within my field, is that students will forgive their teachers a lot of things. They'll forgive us if we pitch up late, if we're not prepared, if we said that they would get their papers back marked and we didn't have time. They forgive all those things. But the one thing they do not forgive is if they perceive us to be unfair. And unfairness, from a student's perspective, is not just about the way you grade their tests or their papers. Unfairness means, for example, another research study is that teachers treat low achievers differently than they treat high achievers. And some of the fairness things include always putting the same students as group leaders, always calling on the same students, one of the empirical facts about low achievers is that teachers make eye contact longer with a high achiever than they do with a low achiever. Sorry, I don't mean you're a low achiever. I'm just using you as you're a convenient example there. So one of the things that has changed in my classroom, because I found myself, to my shame, that I was engaging in some of these behaviors with my lower achievers. So I have changed the way I conduct my classes based on some of the literature that I discovered while doing this presentation. Other characteristics that are important include mutual respect, include being fun, having a sense of humor, and having a personal or unique style. So important characteristics to keep in mind for teacher effectiveness. Number 4 is with-it-ness. Now, with-it-ness is basically the state of being on top of things, tuned into the teaching, learning environment, and in control of the various facets or aspects of your job and of the profession. Basically, it means, is your classroom organized and managed well? Do you keep up student engagement and classroom momentum? Do you have good time management skills? And can you multitask effectively? So being a with-it teacher is one who can adapt to the changing needs of not only his or her job, but the profession as a whole. Instructional effectiveness is another important characteristic on my list, and this is the ability of knowing how to teach. Now, we have this analogy in English language teaching, and I can't remember who it's attributed to. It's the analogy of, do you have 20 years of teaching experience as opposed to 1 year of teaching experience 20 times? So we all know that basically it doesn't depend on the number of years of teaching experience you have. It's how you learn from the mistakes you make in year 1. And if you keep making those same mistakes year after year, you're not developing or growing as a professional. So a good teacher learns from those mistakes made in the first year, and they don't make those mistakes the second year. Maybe they make different mistakes the second year, but cumulatively they grow and they become more effective as a classroom teacher. Number 6 on my list is good communication skills. So important, and probably good communication skills would be a slide on any presentation about effectiveness in any career. But I think it's really important with teachers, especially teachers who use, well, at least in the UAE, most of us use in the government institutions, English as a medium of instruction. So good communication skills are important because we serve as role models for our students. Now, what do we have to be able to do typically within our jobs? Well, we have to be able to articulate ideas, talk about issues, express our beliefs to our administrators and to our colleagues. We also have to be skilled at conflict resolution because on a typical day, we play more roles than just teacher, right? What are some of the roles we play as a teacher that are different than teacher? Sometimes we're mothers, right, or fathers. Psychologists, counselors, right, what else? Okay, so we play roles in different aspects of our jobs. Sometimes I hate to say that I feel that I'm no more than just a babysitter at times. But luckily those times are few and far between. So we play lots of different roles. Hopefully most of the time we're being a teacher. But depending on the age level and where students are in the whole academic and their academic backgrounds, we play lots of different roles, and we have to be able to be skilled at conflict resolution within those roles. Another thing that we have to be able to do is email. I'm ashamed to admit that I remember the days before email. Do any of you remember before email? How did we communicate? How do we communicate way back then? If our supervisor or our chair wanted to get in touch with us, they picked up the phone, right? If we were there, we answered. If we weren't, they left a message, right? Or they left a memo in our pigeonhole. Or maybe a letter even, yes. So how long did we have to respond to that letter or telephone call? Maybe by the next day, right? Now, if I get an email from my supervisor, and if I haven't answered it in 15 minutes, he is on the phone saying, Christine, didn't you get my email? So although technology has made our lives a lot easier, the expectation that we work harder and faster is still there. I don't know if you agree with me on that. I know that this is part of a technology conference, and I am by no means against technology, but I do feel that our expectations to work harder and faster are there with technology. Finally, public speaking and presentation skills are another type of communication skill we have to be able to have. I like to say in my life is ruled by the letter T, because my academic specialty is testing, and I'm in the field of TESOL. I was TESOL president. The other T in my life is called Toastmasters. Do any of you know Toastmasters? This is a club for public speaking and leadership skills. And about 10 years ago, I went to my first Toastmaster meeting with the goal of, I have to see what a Toastmasters meeting is so I can open up a club at my college. That was my goal. And I have to admit that I went and I felt a bit arrogant because I thought to myself, you know, I have a doctorate, I'm a native speaker of English, I've given all these conference presentations, and then I thought to myself, what could these people possibly teach me about public speaking? But when I went to my first meeting, my eyes were opened. And quite frankly, I've been in Toastmasters for 10 years, and it is the second best thing I have ever done for my own professional development, with the first being my doctorate. So it is really, really important. So when I went to that meeting, they had kind of negative feelings about me because they said, she's a native speaker, she has a doctorate, and she's a teacher. What they meant by that was that I had so many hours of public speaking experience in front of my students. So I got to thinking, is what I'm doing with you two today the same thing that I do with my students in class?
More or less.
Well, there's a lot more interaction in a classroom, right? And for example, if I say, if I'm being really boring, can my students get up and leave?
No.
No, not without fear of retribution. But if I'm being really boring, can you get up and leave?
No.
Yes, you can. Please don't. You're probably too polite to actually do that. But the people in the back, you know, my eyesight is not so good, so if one or two people snuck out, I probably wouldn't notice. So the power is different in something like this. And you know, if my students ask me a question in class and I don't know the answer, I'll say, I'll tell you tomorrow. But if you ask me a really hard question, you know, we'll have to make other arrangements. We don't have a do-over, or we're not meeting again tomorrow where I can follow up with that answer. So I think the logical next step for teachers is to present their areas of expertise. How many here are giving a presentation? Are here as presenters? Oh, a lot of you. Okay, so good communication skills important. Street smarts is another important characteristic, especially in the UAE, where we have a high percentage of the teachers who are expatriates, okay? For some reason, teaching is not a career that Emiratis are attracted to for a number of different reasons. So we have a high percentage of people who come here from other countries to teach at all levels. So oftentimes, street smarts are an issue, because when I first came here, I knew a little bit about Islam. I didn't know a lot about the country at all. So when you work in an environment where the native language is different, where the culture is different, where the religion is different, you have to develop street smarts. You have to know what to do and what not to do, what battles to fight, what kinds of materials to avoid, because, you know, if you make a mistake, it could be very high stakes. When I used to work at UAE University, do we have anybody from UAEU? Way back in the night, this was a long time ago, we had this special award that nobody wanted to win. It was called the Golden Falcon Award. And for any of you who know about Gulf Air, you know Gulf Air?
Yes.
The Golden Falcon is the logo of Gulf Air. So if you made a really serious mistake from a cultural or a religious perspective, you were fired immediately and you were put on the first flight of Gulf Air out of the country. So without even having time to, you know, pack your bags or whatever. So having street smarts is important. For those of you who teach in countries where you share the native language, the culture, and the religion of your students, if you make a mistake and you lose your job, not a problem. Well, a problem, but you don't lose your visa and your house and where your kids go to school. So it can be a very high stakes thing. So street smarts, number 7 on my list. Number 8 on my list is a willingness to go the extra mile, having high expectations for your students, leading by example. I hope that I've been going through as I've been going through these top 10, that you're thinking in a self-evaluative mode, like identifying what you're good at and what you might need to have some improvement in. Well, for me, if I were to give myself high marks on something, it would be number 8. I think a lot of my success as a teacher is because I am willing to go the extra mile. Number 9, being a lifelong learner. How many of you got into this field thinking that you wouldn't, you know, once you were done with your bachelor's or your master's or your doctorate, that would be it? You would be set and you could work. Nobody, right? Because from the time we start going to university, we know that this is just the beginning of what we'll have to do in our own training and development. So for me, 2 things are important with regard to lifelong learning. The first is being reflective. Now, I know that this is something in the busy life of a teacher whereby sometimes I feel that I haven't had really an original thought in a week because I'm so busy doing the day-to-day stuff. But I'm trying to infuse more reflection into my life because reflection has been, you know, much researched, and it is very important to engage in, especially as an educator. Another thing that I'm convinced of is the idea of having a personal and professional strategic plan. How many here have a personal or professional strategic plan? How many of you have one that is written down? Good. This is a good group. Usually nobody raises their hands. This is so good. I am convinced that the reason that I won the election for TESOL International President is because I strategically planned out how to become a TESOL president. A few years before I wanted to run, I critically evaluated my own academic portfolio against those people who had already served as TESOL president. I found that the thing that I was lacking in was publication. So I went and I started to publish. I beefed up that area of my, I guess, persona or profile, and I lost once, but then won the second time. So I am sure that had I not looked for that area, that perhaps I wouldn't have been so lucky to win a second time. So for many of you, assuming a leadership position might be the logical next step in becoming, in moving up in the field. This quote by McEwan, I think, is an important one. It basically says, if you can lead in the classroom, you can lead anywhere. And I think this is so true, because a lot of teachers do not consider themselves leaders, but what we do in the classroom with our students is a typical leader-follower type of situation. Now, number 10 on my list is the part that I don't do so well in life outside the classroom. There are plenty of sources out there, particularly in the self-help literature, that warn against being too focused on your job. And when I started reading these sources many years ago, I basically said, I don't have time for a hobby because my job is so important and I'm a teacher. So I ignored it, but I kept reading it in many sources. So I said, okay, I'm going to give the hobby thing a try. And the proviso with hobbies and having something else outside the workplace is that when you decompress on the weekend, forget about your job a little bit, it recharges you, which serves to lower your stress levels, and you are in fact more effective when you come back into the classroom on either Sunday or Monday morning or whenever your week begins. So now I am convinced that having something outside the classroom as an interest is important to your own development. So there you have it, my top 10. How am I doing for time, Joe? 2 minutes. Perfect. Okay. So some closing thoughts on what I've said. Obviously, we can't be everything to everyone. And there will be areas where we are not universally strong. I hope that you have been looking at some of these areas and saying, okay, I'm good in 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, but maybe I need to work on 8 and 10. This is the purpose of doing this. This is one of the areas that I have seen. This is how I try to reflect, by meeting with groups of teachers and understanding their own perspectives. So which of these traits is most important to you? That's for you to judge.